deindustrialized themselves, destroyed their economies, and are facing oblivion. That's true in Germany, France, and Great Britain. The places that have not deindustrialized themselves, the people that did not throw open their borders to invasion from the Middle East and Africa, donate $2 million, you get to be ambassador in wherever you want to go. The same thing is true if you look at the Witkoff. I mean, I thought we were going to get past all of this, that we wouldn't be back where we were with Hunter Biden. But the more I see of this administration and the antics that are going on, all of which revolve around money, the only conclusion I can reach is that this is as corrupt as the predecessor. So that's why they have been acquiring and hoarding as much gold as possible. I don't know what we have for gold holdings. I'm suspicious of any claims whatsoever. I hope we have at least half of what we claim. I just don't know. But the point is, this is a world in which their Lilliputian armies can't fight anybody. They're certainly not up to confront the battle-hardened Russian military establishment that has straightened out whatever was wrong and is now doing better than ever. So he's kind of in a fantasy world.
Well, I thought they were buying Russian oil that came out of India, and the Indians were doing a land office business, making lots of money as a result. Look, the whole thing is ridiculous. He's addressing a body, most of whom, I would say he's addressing the members of the United Nations, most of whom see Ukraine as the problem, not Russia, and see our backing of Ukraine as the problem, not Russia. So that's the first thing needs to be kept in mind. This is Joe Biden, too. This is Biden standing up, dressed up like Donald Trump with his spray tan and nice suit and red tie, telling everybody that they had better get on board with us or else. Well, they're not going to get on board with us. None of these states can be expected to move beyond the limits of their own interests. Energy is at the core of international trade. Energy is vital. Our closest allies are amongst the most foolish, and those people have now effectively deindustrialized themselves, destroyed their economies, and are facing oblivion. That's true in Germany, France, and Great Britain. The places that have not deindustrialized themselves, the people that did not throw open their borders to invasion from the Middle East and Africa and other places, and I'm talking about Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and others, they're in very good shape, frankly speaking, comparatively speaking. And I think the real message here is what Orban said to the collective Europeans and the European Union and NATO. He said, don't waste your time going to Washington. If you want to end this war, go to Moscow. And I think that's where this is all going to end. It's going to end between the Europeans and Moscow, and we will simply look ridiculous on the periphery of the whole thing. So his speech is pointless and eminently forgettable. No, the only thing that would occur is that they would bring their economic productivity and development to an end. China, India are going to go elsewhere to find markets for whatever they produce. They'll go to other countries that have the things they need. The big mistake here is, once again, the same one that Trump has been making ever since he took office. He thinks it's 1,991. It's not. The world has moved on. No one's waiting around for Washington to catch up. So let's assume that he's successful and all the Europeans join hand in hand with us. It's sort of like we all chain ourselves together and jump in Lake Michigan together. We all drown together. They're not going to do it. Doesn't make any sense. It's not going to have the effect that he wants. It would have been much easier if he had simply said, and this would have been the easiest way for him to sort of extricate himself from the disaster. He said, look, I've done all that I can do. I can't bring these parties together, but I'm no longer going to fund the war. I'm going to get out of it. I'm not going to fund it. I'm not going to support this regime any longer. But we never get that. We never get a comment from Trump that says this man Zelensky and this organized crime state that he has built, where he's got $1 to $1.5 billion in cash in various bank accounts, that he successfully pilfered and stolen from all the money that we've shipped over to Ukraine. And then talk about, the terrible position of the Ukrainian people who desperately want an end to the war, because we know they do, even though they won't publish that polling data in the West. He could have done all those things, but he's never done it. He goes back to the Biden playbook. Oh, Russia is the problem. If we can only harm Russia further, then Russia will come to the negotiating table. It's not going to work. It's failed repeatedly. But you know what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. That's Donald Trump. He's joined the insane club founded by his friend Joe Biden that preceded him. Well done. Well, I think that has to be taken into consideration. I'm told by almost everybody in the administration that I talk to that this is the most transactional administration in history. In other words, you put your money down for whatever it is that you want, and you're going to get it. I mean, they've effectively mortgaged off or sold off ambassadorships. Donate $2 million, you get to be ambassador in wherever you want to go. The same thing is true if you look at the Witito Trump digital currency exchange that is being set up, that's attracted hundreds of millions of dollars of investment over in Qatar. I mean, all of this is sort of legalized grift, legalized dishonesty and deceit. I mean, I thought we were going to get past all of this, that we wouldn't be back where we were with Hunter Biden. But the more I see of this administration and the antics that are going on, all of which revolve around money, the only conclusion I can reach is that this is as corrupt as the predecessor. So I think the answer to your question is, this is Biden 2. This is not Trump 1. 5. The only spin that's being imparted to all of this is Donald Trump's, favorite mantra, which is, we'll sell it to you. What you do with it is your problem. Well, that's not leadership. This is not what you expect from a leader of one of the great nations on the planet. Particularly if you're interested in any sort of peace coming about in the region, you would go back to what I said before. This shouldn't happen. If I had been president, it would never have happened. Remember all these speeches? Well, then, Mr. President, stop funding it because he's not helping the Europeans. The Europeans are in serious fiscal trouble as it is. And whatever we get from these arms sales, while it may be helpful, isn't going to offset the $37 trillion national sovereign debt that we confront. So I'm tired of it. I'm just depressed because I think a lot of us had voted for the man, thought more highly of him than he deserves. Somebody who I trust very much, who is inside the Pentagon and is intimately familiar with all of the missile arsenals or missile inventories that you're discussing, and various other kinds of rocket weapons, says 8 to 10 years to recover unless we are very efficient. Of course, that's a huge, statement. If we're very efficient, we can rebound in 5 to 7 years. But he thinks that's unlikely because of all the different defense contractors, the different weapon systems, and Congress's constant meddling in the defense budget to ensure that they and their donors and constituents all get a share of the budget. So I think it's probably closer to 8 to 10 years than 5 to 7. But it may be that Donald Trump is making a mistake of assuming that we are invincible and vulnerable, that no one is really going to challenge us. And I think that's a mistake. If you look at the recent in paying us for the weapons that we send, but that was a big day that nobody thought a thing like that could happen. You had countries that weren't paying 2%, and now they're all paying 5%. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of weapons they're buying, and they're buying them from us. They're buying them from the U.S. In the old days, Biden gave them everything, gave them $350 billion worth of money and weapons. That's a lot of money and a lot of weapons. And we got really not much for it. We gave the money to Ukraine to fight, and they've proven they're very brave. I mean, look, they're fighting this is a war going on 3.5 years. And people thought it would be over quickly because Russia is a big military power, and Ukraine, I tell you, they are good fighters. That's kind of one of his common themes there is that, look, Biden just gave all this money, the weapons away, but we're selling it. So we're actually making money. But just before that, we went to that break there. You were saying like the most likely case is not 5 to 7, but maybe 6 to 8 years. And that's once it stops, but it hasn't stopped yet. Well, that was the point I was trying to make, that the world has changed and the weapon systems that can destroy us are on display in Russia right now being used against Ukrainians. These weapons are proliferating. In other words, they're finding a home in other countries. And one of those, of course, is China, that has the largest manufacturing base in the world, and certainly the largest manufacturing base in the world devoted to military production. So the point is that he's essentially saying, look, I blackmailed our allies and now they're paying up. Well, 5% from Bulgaria isn't a lot. 5% from Romania isn't a lot. 5% from Latvia or Finland is not a lot. In other words, we've got to be reasonable, and you're talking about uneven sums of money, uneven investments. There is no unity of effort. There is no unity of command. And NATO purchases, buys. Yes, most of it is going to be American military equipment, which is a great triumph, especially since we've seen a lot of evidence that our equipment doesn't perform very well. But of course, they're probably looking primarily at missiles and radars. Our radars are excellent, and I think most of our missiles are pretty good. But the whole thing is ridiculous. And what I was going to try and say about Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, if you look at this pact that they've got with China that is pregnant with meaning, all sorts of things are going on with that. But the one thing you've got to keep in mind is that the Chinese will provide state-of-the-art missile technology, radar technology to both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And they will be paid handsomely in gold for it. And they're not the only ones. The Egyptians have conducted combined exercises with the Chinese, as the Iranians have, and the Chinese are providing some of the same technology to the Egyptians. So within the next few months, I suspect that you will see state-of-the-art missile batteries in Egypt that the Israelis can't cope with. And I think you're going to see the same thing happen in Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happened in Turkey. In other words, China is changing the military balance in the region, and that change in that balance is something we cannot easily redress because they can outproduce us, and they're not alone. And they've had brilliant testing grounds called Ukraine, so they found out exactly what does and doesn't work. Bottom line is that that's the tip of the proverbial iceberg. That's also part of a change in the entire global economy, where everybody is running away from the dollar. The dollar is plunging in value. We're debasing the currency. People are offloading it. The Chinese are offloading more treasuries. Everybody is trying to get rid of the dollar, which they see as a menace. They also see it as a weapon that can be used against them. They look at what we did to Russia. Well, we told the Russians, you're not going to have access to anything in the West anymore. We're cutting you out of SWIFT, and we're going to steal $300 billion of your money. So everybody looked at this and said, well, gee, then we need to find an alternative. And guess what? They have an alternative. And that alternative is developing rapidly. China is at the heart of this thing. China is going to open gold vaults in Riyadh as well as in Hong Kong. What are these gold vaults for? They're almost warehouses. For instance, if the Chinese buy X amount of oil from the Saudis, for instance, the Saudis will be paid in gold. If the Saudis buy technology from China, the Chinese will be paid in gold. In other words, the yuan, which is their currency, is now gold-backed. That's why they have been acquiring and hoarding as much gold as possible. I don't know what we have for gold holdings. I'm suspicious of any claims whatsoever. I hope we have at least half of what we claim. I just don't know. But the point is, this is a world in which right now we can't compete. So the de-dollarization goes hand in hand with the delivery of lethal missile technology to places like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Egypt, Turkey, and all of these states are aligned against Israel. So this is a big deal that has to be viewed against the backdrop of what's already happened in Europe. NATO is disintegrating. This is not some strong, cohesive alliance. Far from it. And the three principal allies, I call them the three amigos, London, Paris, and Berlin, are in bad shape. Their lion armies can't fight anybody. They're certainly not up to confront the battle-hardened Russian military establishment that has straightened out whatever was wrong and is now doing better than ever. So he's kind of in a fantasy world. I assume he understands, but perhaps he doesn't understand what's happening to us economically. The debasement of our currency, the de-dollarization, and the destination for us is default. The sooner we do it, the better. But I don't think we're going to do it at all. I think we're just going to grind ourselves down to nothing, which I think is probably the preferred outcome for Wall Street. But it's disastrous for us as a people. Now, you mentioned something about NATO, and I want to pivot there because there's also things happening off the headlines there that are very important, probably should be on the headlines. And that is here of late that there's been a lot of claims that Russia has been violating the airspace of Poland and Estonia. And since June, Romania, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And so now all of a sudden, there's been a lot of alarm that's saying, all right, no more. We're going to have this Eastern Shield that NATO is going to put up there. We're going to use lots of additional alliance firepower to protect against what may come from Russia. And then now the verbal parts are starting to get heated up as well. And I want to start, first of all, with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who's saying, if necessary, we'll shoot down Russian jets, if necessary. Yes, we will shoot down a plane, or of course, we already shot down a drone if necessary. And this exactly comes back to what I just mentioned, that we will always assess the situation, assess the immediate threat the plane poses, and acting quickly and decisively is exactly what happened in these two cases. And I'm really proud of our fighter jet pilots doing this and our commanders in contact with them, coordinating all these activities. Clearly, what Russians are doing is not acceptable. If it is intentional or not, at least it is reckless, and it should stop. Absolutely. And what they will see now over the last couple of weeks is that whatever happens, we are there. And it will not, as you've seen in the next statement, detract us from supporting Ukraine. If that is what they might be thinking they could achieve, I don't know what is in their minds. If it was intentional, well, first let's admit that Rue's words were bravely spoken. He sounds like a man who is defiantly shaking his fist at the enemies of mankind and sort of reminding everybody that this fight will go on until evil has been vanquished. It's a lot of nonsense. It's horse dong. We've looked at this, and NATO looked at this. I'm talking about NATO headquarters and the military headquarters in Mons have looked at this whole allegation. The first thing that NATO concluded and said publicly was this was not an attack on NATO. Okay, ruled it out right off the bat. Well, if it's not an attack, what is it? Is it something along the lines that you described? Is this Ukrainians capturing electronically some of these unmanned aerial vehicles and directing them towards Poland or Lithuania? I have no idea. Did someone in Norway up near the Arctic Circle sight a Russian unmanned aerial vehicle on the edge of the air defense identification zone and conclude that it did straight into their airspace? I have no idea. I do know that the jets that were launched didn't seem to have much success against these targets in the air because less than 20% of them were struck. And I know from someone on the ground in Poland who checked it carefully that the debris that fell on a house in central Poland was not from an unmanned aerial vehicle. It seems to have come from an unexploded munition launched by one of the jets. I think the whole thing is hot air. It's nonsense. But what's depressing about the whole thing is that this is one more last gasp as an effort to drag us, the United States, into a war with Russia, because that's what it's all about. These are little nations. They have armed forces. The Polish army, by the way, is very, very good. It's probably better than the other three armies, German, French, and British. But it's too small to make a dent. About the only thing they can do is deploy another 10 or 15,000 troops to the border with bare Russia or Ukraine. But to launch a major operation and offensive on the ground, they don't have the depth, they don't have the experience, they don't have the organizational construct to support it. All of this is just hot air. And I think it's getting hotter by the day because the position of the globalists who've been running the show in Europe is eroding very, very rapidly. The three amigos are all going to go down. They're not going to survive. And this Polish president, President Nawrocki, had better read the tea leaves because the only intelligent thing he said since he became president was his announcement that under no circumstances would any Polish soldiers fight in Ukraine against Russia. And he noted that roughly 10,000 Poles were killed inside Ukrainian uniform for fighting against the Russians. Nobody has an appetite for that in Europe at all. So Ra is full of hot air, but he's also dangerous because he creates the illusion that there's some readiness for war which doesn't exist. And this could easily result in an accident. Somebody somewhere along the line of contact, which is the eastern front of NATO, could suddenly come into contact accidentally with something that's Russian, and you have an incident, and the whole thing erupts into an all-out war. I mean, I hope not. So I think the rhetoric needs to cool off because it's all nonsense. It's not going to happen. By signing the Hitler-Stalin Pact, you helped launch World War II, the bloodiest in history. By Sovietizing Central Europe, you caused the Cold War. Don't start another one. We are peaceful democracies who have studiously avoided actively joining your attempt to reconquer Ukraine. But we will not be intimidated. I have only one request to the Russian government. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned. It sounds like Anne Applebaum wrote those remarks for him. That's his wife, and she is a card-carrying globalist neocon, sort of the modern equivalent of a Bolshevik. And she and Jack Keane, I'm sure, would like to get together with Sorsky and plan the next war. Now, on the positive side, I was delighted that he at least told the truth about the Second World War without Stalin and communism. You don't get a war without communism. There's no national socialism. I mean, the chicken and the egg needs to be understood. And Stalin was quite happy to see the war launched by Germany against France and Great Britain because he thought, much as FDR, by the way, that this would be another exercise in trench warfare and drag on and on and on. He hoped that it would grind down Germany so that he could strike from the east and overwhelm Germany, and the Allies would be stuck, and so we would make lots of money selling the Allies, everything from spare parts, weapons, munitions, and food to the people in the field. So both FDR and Stalin miscalculated. The war was over in a month. They thought it was going to last for at least a year. But I'm glad to hear him mention that. But having said that, everything else is pure, unadulterated nonsense. You are warned. I'm sure everybody in Moscow is shaking in their boots. You know what a ridiculous statement to make. But this is the sort of war rhetoric that you get out of these people. There is no comprehension of of what they are talking about. Whatever they saw between 1941 and 1945 would shrink to insignificance next to the destruction and the loss of life that would ensue if these fools carried out their stated intention of provoking the Russians into a war. That's how serious this is. Well, and that didn't seem to be lost on the Russians, because Ambassador Sikorsky, on the other side of that circle there, he also talked about the if not the origins, the consequences of World War II and what Russia did. The Polish Prime Minister Tusk today recognized that not a single drone that was found contained explosives. Not a single one posed a threat to civilians. As for the Polish opposition, it clearly said this is a blatant provocation, the aim being to pull Poland into war. Primitive hatred for our country and an attempt to portray Russia as the main threat to pan-European security is before our very eyes becoming the only ideology of European states. They're trying their utmost to make the next generation forget the bitter experience of predecessors of today's Euro-integrators, Russia. Russia has a battle-hardened military establishment. They've absolutely embraced the new paradigm, which is connecting ISR to strike systems and making it impossible for your enemy to move, to think, to do anything, and then using the maneuver forces they've got on the ground to exploit what the ISR strike creates in terms of opportunities on the battlefield. They've done that. We're a long way from that. We can get there. We have the technology, but we aren't thinking in those terms right now. The Europeans are woefully behind. So, again, this is all empty rhetoric. It is dangerous, though, for the reason that I mentioned earlier. These stupid, pointless statements designed to create the illusion of strength where there is none invites a response. And that's something we don't want. No one in their right mind wants a war with Russia. And the Russians certainly don't want a war with the West. If they were hell-bent for a war with the West, they'd have been on the Polish border a year and a half ago at the least. But they weren't interested in that. They're already sitting on most of the terrain that was historically Russian with a Russian population.